Welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally. This is Coach's Corner. I'm here with Erika Anderson, and we're going to talk about what it means to make real change in your life, because that's exactly what Erika does. She helps people make changes, real life changes, in order to become something fantastic. But before we get into that, Erika, I took a preview of your website there, and I got to ask something first before we get into this conversation because I am not studied in mythos, but the very nature of your program and the name of your company, can you just dive into that just a little bit, please?
Yes, I love that you asked that, Keith. So the name of our company is Proteus, and Proteus is a Greek god. And when I was starting Proteus almost 34 years ago in 1990, I really wanted to have this sense of, as you say, mythos, timelessness, like what's something that has always been true for people. And so I was looking in this book called A Guide to the Gods and Goddesses, and I found out about this Greek god called Proteus, and how he shows up in mythology is in the Odyssey. At one point, Odysseus wanted to know the future, and he was told that there was this god that lived in the sea, Proteus, and that Proteus was a shapeshifter. And that the story was that if you could catch Proteus and hold on to him, no matter what shape he assumed, then he would be forced to tell you the future.
Wow.
And so that's why we call the company Proteus.
I love it. And I am not, like I said, versed in mythos, but now I got to find out more. So it's in the Odyssey. Yes. Is that
Yeah.
where? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Really cool. But then let's dive into that. So this is about helping people to become, I guess, more than what they are right now. And you've got the secret sauce to help people find out how to do that. Where does it all begin?
Oh, you asked such good questions. So I would say it's about helping people make necessary change.
Okay.
And so I've written a number of books, but the last book, as you know, that I wrote is called Change from the Inside Out. And when I write a book, I'm always trying to crack a code for people. I'm always trying to say, okay, what's a difficult thing that I can make easier for people?
Wow.
So the reason I got interested in writing this book about change, we at Proteus had already had a change practice for about 10 years, and we have a really good 5-step process about change that integrates and balances the human and mechanical side of change. And yet, I noticed that even though we had and used this process, that change was still, real change, necessary change was still incredibly hard for people. Really hard, especially change that's imposed upon them, change that's not their own idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really wanted to find out why is change so hard for us, and then how can we make it easier? How can we become more change capable, more fluent in making the necessary changes in our lives, which is what you're talking about, right?
I am, but you said something really unique. Cracking the code. So what code?
Whatever code, like in my first book, which is called Growing Great Employees, I wanted to crack the code of managing people. How can I make it easier for human beings who are the managers of other people to do that in a way that works for them, for the organization, for the people being managed? So every time I write a book, I'm looking at some difficult knot in human endeavor that I can untangle. So in this latest book, I was trying to untangle change, right?
So you must be a magician of sorts because people for centuries have been trying to figure that out, but you apparently have figured it out, yes?
That sounds incredibly grandiose, but yeah, I feel like I'm good at cracking some pretty deep codes. And I'm very excited about what we figured out with this change book. So let me kind of dig into this. So the first thing I was trying to figure out is, why is change so hard for us, right?
Okay.
And as I thought and observed and read and looked, I realized that until very recently in human history,
Mhm.
people's lives, like if you think of a person's life, an individual person's life, 2 or 3 or 500 or 1,000 years ago, that person's life would have been, for us today in the 21st century, almost unimaginably stable. They would grow up where their parents and grandparents and great grandparents grew up. They'd do the same work. They'd go to the same church. They'd eat the same food. They'd have the same conversations, birth to death. That was a person's life. And when a big change happened 3 or 5 or 800 years ago, it was almost inevitably terrible. It was a war or a famine or a flood, right? Or a plague.
Yeah.
And so we're wired for thousands of years, perhaps all human history, to think that when a big change comes, it's going to be terrible. And that the best thing you can do, the best bet, is to get back to the previous set of circumstances as soon as possible. Not to go forward, but to go back, right?
Back to a safe place.
Yes, back to the safe pre-plague, pre-flood, pre-fire, pre-famine place. So that's our wiring. So I thought, oh my gosh, that's powerful wiring. So let's then go into an individual person. How do individual people react to change? And more importantly, what happens mentally and emotionally when we actually do go through a change? And so I came to create this thing that we now call the change arc, which is it gets harder and then it gets easier. So the first thing that happens, almost without exception, when a change comes at us, is we have 3 questions. They're remarkably predictable. 3 questions. First question is, what does this mean for me? Right? What impact is this going to have on me? Second question is, why is this happening?
Ooh.
Because we have a preference for the status quo, it's like, if you don't give me a really good reason, I'm not even going to engage with you, right? And then the third question is, what will it look like when it's done? Because we have this deep fear of the unknown, right? It could be much worse. So you tell me what it's going to look like. Okay, so we start, and you'll notice if you've ever led an organization that these are the questions people ask. Now, go back to that thousands and thousands of years of wiring that changes.
Because they're going to fight it.
Exactly. So even as they're asking those questions, as we're asking those questions, we're assuming that the change is going to be difficult and costly and weird. Right?
And probably a mixture of the all 3, yeah.
Exactly.
And uncomfortable, yeah.
Uncomfortable as a result. Difficult means I don't know how to do it. Other people are going to make it hard. There are going to be all kinds of obstacles, right? Difficult. Costly, and it was so interesting when I figured this out. Costly means it's going to take from me things I value. Right? So maybe time and money, but usually deeper things like identity and relationships and expertise and reputation. Doing things in this new way is going to make me look like an idiot, and I won't be able to hang out with the people I usually hang out with. And who will I even be if I'm doing things in this new way, right?
It's so true, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And weird just means, oh,
it's uncomfortable.
That's not right. That's weird. I don't know how, right? So as we're asking these questions, we're assuming our mindset is going to be difficult, costly, and weird. So that's the bias, even as we're asking the questions. Why is this happening? No good reason, right? It's just dumb. They're just trying to make our lives a living hell. It goes through this filter of negativity. And then we noticed that when someone actually does make a change, it's almost never because something external changes. It's because their mindset shifts. And they start to believe that this particular change could be easy, or if not easy, at least doable versus difficult. Oh, I can see how I could, right? Yeah. They start to believe that it could be more rewarding than it is costly. It could give them more than it takes away. And they start to believe that it could be normal versus weird, right? And when someone's mindset has largely shifted to thinking that the change could be easy, or at least doable, rewarding, and normal, then they'll make the change. They'll do the new behaviors, they'll learn the new things, they'll operate in the new ways that the change requires, and the change can be made. So when I figured this out, I was almost jumping up and down, because it's like, oh, that's the path. This is why it's hard, and this is how you rewire yourself to become more change capable. You help yourself learn to make that mindset shift more quickly when a necessary change arises in your life.
Now, personal change requires time. There's no magic switch to turn it on and off. So how much time that do you see does it take for people to make the change that you would like them to make? Is there a time limit? Like, how do you measure that in time?
It's very different for different people, different circumstances. I mean, there's so many variables, Keith. It depends on how committed they were to the previous way of doing things. It depends on how skillful the support is they're getting to help them make that mindset shift. There's hundreds of variables. Some people can change like that. Some people take months.
Well,
Depends
then
on the
let's
size
talk
of-
about one of those variables because I have conversations around change. That's quite literally what the Question Guy podcast, not this show, but another show that I have conversations on. It's all about people's personal transformation stories.
Yeah.
And what they tell me is that without the necessary supports, other people in their lives, change is very, very difficult. Now, not
Yes.
all, but most people say without somebody, at least one other person, change would have been extremely difficult. Do you
Yeah.
find that to be true?
Yeah, that's a great insight. And there are a couple of reasons why that's true. But the one that I'll focus on is the idea of normal. So I was saying, difficult to easy or doable, costly to rewarding, and weird to normal. So for us as human beings, how normal mostly is defined is we think something is normal when someone who we think is like us does it, or when someone we admire and want to emulate does it. So if there's someone in our lives who we admire and who we think is like us, who is supportive of a change or has already made that change, it makes it so much easier. And in lots of cases, as the people you're talking to are saying, it's the one thing that makes it doable because it's like the light in the darkness.
Mhm.
This looks difficult to me. I think it's going to take from me things I value. But Sally, who I really respect and who I think has her head screwed on straight, says this is the way to do it. Okay, I'm going to try and get myself over there.
One of the things that you said earlier was people need to figure out, or you need to tell them, or in some way scope what's in it for me? How will I benefit? Because I
Yes,
think without that, there isn't going to be a change. And
100%.
until some people recognize that, ooh, maybe there is something here for me.
Yes, yes,
What
yes.
can you talk to that?
Yeah, and that's what that costly rewarding thing is. And so much in organizations, and it's true in personal change too, when lots of times when they're going to make a big change in an organization, let's say it's a manufacturing company and their whole production process is going to change. And the senior executives tend to think about benefits that are meaningful to them, but not necessarily to the rest of the organization. Like, for instance, they say, oh, it'll make us so much more profitable. Well, if you're working on the assembly line, you're going to make $20 an hour, no matter how profitable the company is. That's probably not very meaningful to you. But if it's also going to make it so you don't have to do as much grunt work, or you don't have to do as much rework, or the customers are going to like it better, those things are much more likely to be meaningful to the people who are actually doing the work. So it's important. And when you're thinking about a change that you personally want to go through, not even in an organizational setting, to your point, it's critically important to figure out what the personal benefits, the personal rewards are going to be, because that's one of those three places where you have to make your mindset shift. And when you can see how, oh yeah, it is going to cost me time or effort, or I might feel dumb for a while, but boy, at the end, I'll be able to do this thing better. That's really important to me. And that's really critical to how I see myself. That's
Mm.
a more important reward than the cost, right?
Well, then let's talk about, we've already talked about the name of your company, but we haven't talked about really who are your clients? Like who comes to knock on your virtual door or even your real door if you've got one and
Yeah.
say, I I need change, or at the very least, I would like to see change happen. Who are those people?
They are generally pretty senior executives, either line executives or often HR executives in a company, and our companies range in size from small nonprofits to big, Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies. So it can be any size and shape of company, but it's people who recognize, as you say, that they want to change, that they need to change, and that they need some support or help or expertise to do that.
So with that being said, what's the first step? For those who are watching and listening to this conversation and they recognize the need, they're scared to make it, which is usually the first thing, that first wall, fear the unknown. Can you give our audience, please, something that they could think about, maybe even do tomorrow when they step into work and say, hey, we really need to consider something differently?
Oh, I love that question. So, what I would suggest to your listeners, and this is true on every level, this is true organizationally, interpersonally, just personally within yourself. What I would really suggest is to notice your self talk. Notice how you're talking to yourself in your head. Almost all of us talk to ourselves in our heads. We have like monologue, mental
Oh,
monologue.
yeah, I do it all the time.
Everybody does. Almost everybody does. And notice when you think about this thing that you're thinking, oh, this might need to change, notice what you're saying to yourself about it. And if what you're saying to yourself about it is in that realm of this is going to be difficult, costly, and weird, it's
Hmm.
going to be hard, this is going to make me look bad, I don't know how to do this, then that's a really good indication that you need to change. So notice your self-talk. And if you're having that negative kind of anti-change self-talk, it's like, oh, yep, all right, I probably need to do something about this.
Erika, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me in this conversation.
So
For those,
welcome.
you were absolutely. For those of you who are watching and listening, this has been another edition of Coach's Corner, and I'll see you next time. Take care.